Okay, so let's learn about fractions, how to add and subtract fractions. So the first thing we need to know about fractions is like the parts of a fraction. So looking at 3/4, we know that 3 is a numerator and 4 is a denominator. Top number is the numerator, the bottom number is a denominator. So make sure you know that. Now, what is an improper fraction? An improper fraction is a fraction with the numerator being bigger than the denominator. So 8/7 is an improper fraction. 8, the numerator, is bigger than the denominator of 7. And then a mixed number, 1 1/2. We have a mixed number here, which means that it has a whole number with a fraction. So that's what you call a mixed number. So now that you know a little bit of vocabulary, let's do addition of fractions. So we're going to start with like fractions. Like fractions means that the denominators are the same. So when your denominators are the same, all you have to do is add the numerators. So you would say 1 + 4, and you would get 5. And then you would keep the denominator. So our answer here is 5/6. Okay, so our answer here is 5/6 because you would just add the numerators when they are like fractions. Okay, so you would just add the numerators. And with subtraction, you would just simply do the same thing, but now you're going to subtract the numerators instead of adding. So if you have like denominators, both 8, then you just subtract the 7 minus 3 is 4, and you keep the denominator. Now what you want to do is you want to reduce the fraction as well. So 4/8 will reduce to 1/2. Okay, because you can divide 4 and 8 both by 2 and reduce it to 1/2. Okay, so that is addition and subtraction with like denominators. It gets a little harder when we have unlike fractions. To add or subtract unlike fractions, you have to have the same common denominator. But the thing is you have to figure out how to find the least common denominator if you want to make it a little easier. But I'm going to teach you a trick first if you don't know the least common denominator. So this is a trick that you can use as well. So 2/3 times 5/6. So what you want to do is you want to multiply the denominators together. And so 3 times 6 is 18. So we get a denominator of 18. And then you want to do the diagonals. Starting with the top left corner, you do 2 times 6, which is 12. And 3 times 5, which is 15. So now we have a common denominator, and all you need to do is add the numerators. So 12 plus 15 is 27, and then over 18. We have something that we call an improper fraction, right? An improper fraction. We don't want to have an improper fraction. We also need to reduce. So 27 over 18 can reduce. We can divide them both by, both by 9. So both by 9. And we get 3 over 2, and then we can change this into a mixed fraction. 3 over 2 becomes, 2 goes into 3 one time, and our remainder is 1, or our remainder is 1, so that's our numerator, and then 1 over 2, okay? So you can add and subtract fractions like that as long as you do the diagonal, you start with the top left number and do it that way first. You can add and subtract that way. But that is not the way you always want to do it because you're going to start dealing with higher numbers and they're going to get a little harder. We're going to use the same problem, 2/3 plus 5/6, but we're going to find the least common denominator. Now, how I like to do that is I start with the bigger number and I start just doing its multiples and I see if it's a multiple of 3. So the multiples of 6 are 6. Well, already right there, I have already started and I know that 3 goes into 6. Okay, so I know that that can be my denominator. So I'm going to change my denominator to 6 because that is a multiple of 3. And then I say, well, 3 times what gives me 6? 3 times 2 gave me 6, so I have to do the same thing to the numerator. So 2 times 2 is 4. And then this didn't change, so my numerator there is not going to change. Now I have a same denominator, so I am going to just add the numerators. 4 plus 5 is 9 over 6. And I can reduce that, divide them both by 3, and get 3 over 2. And now I can change 3 over 2 into a mixed fraction. To change to a mixed fraction, this is a little side note, all you do is divide. You say, how many times will 2 go into 3 without going over? Well, it goes in 1 time. And then to find what your numerator is, all you do is say, well, 2 times 1 is 2. 3 minus 2 is 1 left over. And then we use the same denominator. Okay, so that's how, kind of a little lesson within a lesson, how you change to a mixed fraction. So let's do another one. Let's do some practice problems with addition. 1/3 plus 1/5. I'll do the little trick one more time, but that's it. Where you multiply the bottom numbers and you get 15. And then you start with the diagonal on the top left, so 1 times 5 is 5. And then do the other diagonal, 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so 5 plus 3 is 8, and then you keep the denominator when you already have the same denominator. In addition and subtraction, you keep the denominator, so 8 over 15. Okay, but to find the least common denominator, this one actually works out where the least common denominator is the same as that little trick. But if you didn't do the trick and you were trying to do the least common denominator, I start with 5 and I just start listing the multiples of 5. 5 until I see one that is a multiple of 3 as well. So 1, 5, 10, 15. Oh, there we go. That's a multiple of 3 as well. So I am going to do 15. So I know that's a multiple of 3 and 5. So what I do here is I say, well, 3 times 5 gave me 15, so 1 times 5, and do the numerator there. 5 times 3 gave me 15, so 1 times 3, so 3. And now I have the same denominator, so my denominator can stay the same. And then I do 5 plus 3, which is 8. Okay, so 8 over 15, again, we can't reduce it. So that is that. Let's do another one. Let's continue to do these practice problems. We're doing great. 6/7 plus 3/4. So I'm not going to do the little trick anymore because we need to know how to do least common denominator. So I'm going to start with 7 and start doing its multiples. Hopefully one time you won't have to list the multiples. You can just see it in your head. So 7, 14, 21, until I see a multiple that's a 4, 2, 28 right there, because I know 28 is a multiple of 4 as well. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use a denominator of 28. So I know my answer is going to have a denominator of 28. So I say 7 times 4 gave me 28, so I have to do 6 times 4, which is 24. I did 4 times 7, which is 28, so 3 times 7. 21, and then I'm going to add them. 24 plus 21 is equal to 45, and then we have 45 over 28. And we want to change it to a mixed fraction. Reducing wise, I don't see a number that goes into it, but we can change it to a mixed fraction first and then reduce it as well. 28 goes into 45 one time. And then 1 times 28 is 28. If you did 45 minus 28 to see how much is left over, you would get 17 and then over 28. And 17 over 28 doesn't reduce, so we know we reduced it. So our answer is 1 and 17/28. Okay, let's do subtraction. Subtraction's the same way. All you do is subtract the numerators instead of adding the numerators. So 7/8 minus 2/3. So we need to find a least common denominator. So I'm going to take the 8 and start listing its multiples. 8, 16, 24, and I notice that 24 is a multiple of 3 as well. So that means that my denominator is going to be 24. Well, 8 times what gave me 24? 8 times 3 gave me 24, so I have to do that to the top. 7 times 3, 21. 3 times 8 gave me 24, so 2 times 8, which is 16. And now I just subtract them instead of add. So I have 21 minus 16, which is 5 over 24. We keep the denominator when we're adding and subtracting. You keep the denominator when you're adding or subtracting, okay? Okay, and if you have to reduce, then you reduce it as well, just to let you know. So let's just do a review again for improper fractions and changing them into mixed fractions. So if I have 15 over 7, what you do is you do a division problem. You say, how many times does 7 go into 15 without going over? Well, it will go in twice. Well, then you say, well, 2 times 7 is 14, so how many more do I need to get to 15? Well, I need one more. 15 minus 14 is 1. So that, whatever the remainder is what's in the numerator. And then your denominator stays the same. Okay? So that is changing an improper fraction to a mixed fraction. Let's do one more. 26 over 3. So we say, how many times does 3 go into 26? Knowing our multiples, I know that it goes in 3 times 8 is 24, so 8. And then if 3 times 8 is 24, that means I have 2 left over as a remainder. So that goes into my numerator, and then we keep the denominator. Now changing a mixed fraction to an improper, going the other way. This is just a review. So if we have 1 and 1/5, what you do is you multiply the whole number by the denominator and then add the numerator. 1 times 5 is 5. 5 plus 1 is 6, and then you keep the denominator, okay? Let's do one more, and then we'll call it a day. So 2 times 5 is 10, and then you add the numerator, which is 3, so 10 plus 3 is 13. So that becomes my numerator, and then we keep the same denominator. Again, 2 times 5 is 10. 10 plus 3 is 13, and then keep the same denominator, and then you have a mixed fraction into an improper. So there you go. You should know how to add and subtract fractions now.